The silence in the deep space monitoring facility broke when the computers started screaming. Dr. Beth Williams had been reviewing planetary survey data when every alert system in the building began flashing red. She dropped her tablet and rushed to the main control room where technicians were frantically checking their instruments. "What's happening?" she asked the lead operator. "We're getting a signal." "A strong one. It's not natural," Tom Mitchell replied, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Someone's trying to talk to us." The message came through in perfect English, which should have been impossible. No human ship was in that sector of space. No human ship could broadcast from that distance. Yet there it was, clear and unmistakable. "Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet. We are the Deathworld Alliance. We come with an offer of friendship and mutual benefit." Beth felt her heart racing. This was it. First contact. The moment humanity had been preparing for since they first looked up at the stars. She activated the emergency protocols, and within minutes, every major government on Earth was listening to the transmission. The voice continued, speaking with an odd accent but using words any human could understand. "We have observed your species from a safe distance. Your planet is remarkable. Few worlds in our galaxy support such dangerous conditions, yet your people have not only survived but flourished. This marks you as worthy candidates for our alliance." The transmission included coordinates for a meeting point in space, just beyond the outer edge of the solar system. It also contained technical specifications for a communication device that would allow real-time conversation across interstellar distances. Within hours, every major space agency on Earth was mobilizing. The hastily assembled first contact team included Beth as the lead xenobiologist, along with linguist Dr. James Park, engineer Tom Mitchell, diplomat Alex Rivera, and military advisor Colonel Lisa Santos. They launched aboard the Exploration, Vessel Horizon, humanity's most advanced spacecraft. The journey to the meeting coordinates took 3 days. During that time, the team prepared extensively, reviewing every scrap of information about the mysterious Deathworld Alliance. The aliens had been surprisingly forthcoming with basic information about their civilization. They learned that the Alliance consisted of species from planets where survival required exceptional adaptation. The dominant race, called the Vorthak, evolved on a world of constant acid storms. Their partners included the Nexari, silicon-based beings from volcanic planets, and the Korveth, crystalline creatures from frozen methane worlds. "They're proud of surviving difficult conditions," James observed during one of their briefings. "Every message emphasizes how harsh their worlds are, how tough they had to become to survive." "It makes sense they'd be interested in Earth," Beth replied. "Our planet has extreme weather, dangerous wildlife, natural disasters, and a dozen different ways to kill you on any given day." When they reached the coordinates, the alien ship was already waiting. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of Horizon, and covered in what looked like armor plating. Strange energy readings suggested weapons systems that were far beyond human technology. Alex opened the communication channel. "This is Captain Alex Rivera of the Earth vessel Horizon. We're here to discuss your proposal." The response came immediately. "Welcome, humans of Earth. I am Supreme Commander Vextar of the Vorthak fleet. Your arrival proves what we suspected. Only true Deathworld survivors could make such a journey in such a primitive vessel." The backhanded compliment wasn't lost on the human crew. The aliens seemed to view Earth technology as crude but effective, like a stone axe that somehow got the job done. "We invite you to visit our capital station," Vexatar continued. "There, you will meet representatives of all Alliance species and learn of the benefits we offer. In return, we hope you will contribute your unique survival skills to our mutual prosperity." Beth exchanged glances with her teammates. The aliens were being diplomatic, but there was something underneath their words. A certain assumption that humans would be grateful for whatever scraps of technology or status the Alliance might offer. "We accept your invitation," Alex replied carefully. However, we'll need time to prepare for the different atmospheric conditions aboard your station. Of course, we have made provisions for your primitive respiratory requirements. Your species' dependence on oxygen is unusual but not insurmountable. The Vorthak ship guided them to a massive space station orbiting a gas giant. The structure was breathtaking, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules that could house millions of beings. Ships from dozens of different species docked at various ports, their designs ranging from elegant curves to brutal angular constructions. As Horizon approached the docking bay, Beth noticed something interesting. Every ship they passed was heavily armored and bristling with defensive systems. These weren't exploration vessels or cargo haulers. They were warships designed for combat in the harshest possible conditions. They're not just survivors, she realized. They're conquerors. The Alliance doesn't just adapt to Deathworlds. They use their adaptations to dominate other species. The docking process revealed more about Alliance assumptions. The bay they were directed to was clearly designed for primitive species. The airlocks were basic, the security minimal, and the facilities sparse. It was a polite but unmistakable message about where humans ranked in the galactic hierarchy. Supreme Commander Vexatar met them personally at the airlock. He was impressive, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scaled skin that gleamed under the station lights. His eyes were intelligent but held the cold calculation of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Welcome to Nexus Station," he said, his voice carrying easily in the recycled atmosphere. "You are the first representatives of your species to set foot outside your home system. Consider it an honor few beings ever experience." The tour that followed was clearly designed to impress and intimidate. Vextar showed them weapons that could crack planets, shields that could deflect stellar radiation, and manufacturing facilities that operated in conditions that would instantly kill most organic life. At each stop, Alliance representatives emphasized how impossible their achievements would be for lesser species. They spoke of battles fought in the hearts of stars, colonies established on worlds where the very air was poison, and technologies that required resources found only in the most dangerous regions of space. "Your species shows promise," Vextar concluded as they reached the diplomatic quarters. "Earth has clearly prepared you for survival against overwhelming odds. With proper guidance and advanced equipment, humans could serve the Alliance well as shock troops and planetary assault specialists." Beth kept her expression neutral, but inside she was beginning to understand the true nature of this invitation. The Alliance wasn't offering partnership. They were offering servitude dressed up as opportunity. They saw humans as useful barbarians who could be pointed at enemy positions and told to charge. What the aliens didn't realize was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for generations. Earth's governments had run countless scenarios about first contact, and this one was disturbingly familiar. It was the scenario where technologically advanced aliens arrived with offers too good to refuse and expectations that couldn't be questioned. As the human delegation settled into their quarters for the night, Beth reviewed her mission parameters. One final time. They weren't here to be impressed or intimidated. They were here to learn everything they could about the Alliance's capabilities, intentions, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Tomorrow, the real negotiations would begin. The Alliance expected humanity to be grateful for the opportunity to serve. They were about to discover that Earth had raised a species that didn't serve anyone. 3 days into their stay at Nexus Station, the human delegation found themselves in what the Alliance called the Cultural Understanding Center. The name was misleading. What they actually faced was a carefully orchestrated display of superiority, designed to put humans in their proper place within the galactic hierarchy. Dr. James Park watched as Alliance scientists demonstrated their latest achievements in environmental adaptation technology. The lead researcher, a towering Nexari named Dr. Korth, whose silicon-based body glowed with internal heat, gestured proudly at a series of protective suits hanging in reinforced cases. These survival systems represent millennia of advancement, Dr. Korth explained, his voice resonating like grinding stone. Each suit can maintain life in conditions that would destroy unprotected organic matter within seconds. Temperatures reaching 800 degrees Kelvin, atmospheric pressures exceeding 50 Earth atmospheres, and chemical compositions that dissolve most known materials. The Alliance audience murmured appreciatively. Representatives from a dozen species nodded with the confidence of beings who had conquered their hostile environments through superior technology and careful engineering. Impressive, James replied politely. What's the operational duration in extreme conditions? Under maximum stress, approximately 4 standard hours, Dr. Korth answered. Though most missions in such environments require rotational teams to avoid equipment failure. Tom Mitchell, the human engineer, made a note on his tablet. The action seemed to annoy the Nexari scientist, who apparently expected more awe and less data collection from the primitive humans. The demonstration continued. With weapons testing, Alliance Military Coordinator Thys, a crystalline corvette whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, showed off energy weapons that could function in the vacuum of space or the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres. Standard Alliance. Military doctrine requires equipment that operates flawlessly in any environment, Thys explained, her voice chiming like wind through crystal formations. Our warriors must be prepared to fight on worlds where the very air burns flesh or where gravity would crush lesser species into dust. She activated a targeting system that locked onto practice targets placed throughout an obstacle course. The course itself was a marvel of engineering, cycling through different environmental conditions every few minutes. One moment it displayed the frozen methane storms of Corveth homeworld, the next the molten rock flows of Nexari territory. Would any of our human guests care to experience Alliance combat conditions? Thys asked with what might have been humor. We have modified several suits to accommodate your biological requirements. Colonel Lisa Santos stepped forward before anyone could object. I'd be happy to try. The Alliance representatives exchanged glances. They had clearly expected polite refusal or nervous laughter. The idea that a human might actually volunteer for their ultimate survival test seemed to surprise them. The modified suit was bulky and covered with environmental sensors. Alliance technicians spent 20 minutes explaining the various safety systems and emergency protocols. They stressed repeatedly that humans should not feel ashamed if they needed to abort the test early. Most species require extensive training before attempting even basic maneuvers in these conditions, Dr. Korth warned. Your physiology may not adapt quickly to the stress of rapid environmental changes. Lisa nodded patiently through the briefing, then stepped into the testing chamber. The first environment was what the Alliance considered moderately challenging. The surface conditions of Grimhold, the Vorthak homeworld. Acid rain pelted the chamber while temperatures soared to what the readouts showed as 120 degrees Celsius. Theos. Alliance observers watched their displays carefully, waiting for signs that the human was struggling. Instead, Lisa moved through the obstacle course with smooth efficiency, her breathing steady and her movements confident. Atmospheric composition is mostly sulfur compounds with trace acids, she reported through the communication system. Feels like working near an active volcano, but the suit's managing the worst of it. The Alliance technicians looked confused. Their instruments showed that Lisa's stress indicators were barely elevated. If anything, she seemed to be treating the exercise as routine training. The chamber shifted to the next environment, the crushing gravity and hurricane winds of a Nexari colony world. Most beings required powered assistance to move in such conditions. Lisa continued through the course without apparent difficulty. Gravity's about 2.5 Earth standard, she observed. Wind patterns are consistent with Category 3 hurricane conditions. Visibility is limited but manageable. By the time the chamber reached its final test, the frozen methane storms of the Corvette homeworld, Alliance observers were openly staring at their readouts. The human was not only surviving conditions that challenged their best warriors, she was commenting on them like a weather reporter. Temperatures dropped to -180°C. Lisa's voice came through clearly. Methane precipitation is heavy, but the suit's heating systems are handling it. Overall conditions remind me of Antarctic winter training, but with better climate control. When Lisa emerged from the chamber, she looked slightly flushed from exertion, but otherwise unaffected. The Alliance representatives stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. "How did you find the experience?" Dr. Korth asked carefully. "Educational," Lisa replied. "Your suit technology is very sophisticated. The environmental controls are much more advanced than our current systems." What she didn't mention was that the extreme conditions in the chamber fell well within the range of environments where human military forces routinely operated. The acid rain was less corrosive than industrial pollution in Earth's manufacturing centers. The high-gravity environment was comparable to training exercises in centrifuge facilities. The frozen methane storm was actually more comfortable than winter operations in Siberia, thanks to the suit's heating system. The cultural exchange continued over the following days, but the mood among Alliance representatives had shifted noticeably. Where before they had been condescending but welcoming, now they seemed uncertain and watchful. Beth noticed the change during a presentation on Alliance medical technology. Dr. Veltar, the chief medical officer, demonstrated surgical techniques that could repair organisms damaged by extreme radiation, chemical burns, or massive trauma. These procedures were developed from necessity, Dr. Veltar explained. Living on Deathworlds requires medical capabilities that most species never need to develop. "What's your typical survival rate for major trauma cases?" Beth asked. "Approximately 60% for critical injuries," Dr. Veltar replied proudly. "This represents a significant improvement over natural healing rates." Beth made another note. Earth's trauma centers routinely achieved survival rates over 90% for similar injuries, and that was without the advanced technology the Alliance was displaying. The final presentation focused on Alliance colonial capabilities. Supreme. Commander Vextar himself demonstrated how the Alliance established outposts on hostile worlds, using massive terraforming equipment and environmental control systems to create livable spaces. Each colony requires extensive infrastructure to maintain life support, Vextar explained. The investment in time and resources is enormous, but it allows us to claim worlds that other species cannot even approach. Tom Mitchell watched the demonstration with professional interest. The terraforming technology was impressive, but it seemed designed to work around hostile environments rather than adapt to them. Every Alliance colony was essentially a sealed habitat that excluded the native environment entirely. "What about adaptive colonization?" Tom asked. "Modifying the colony to work with local conditions rather than against them?" "Impossible," Vextar replied immediately. "Deathworld environments are too hostile for such approaches. Survival requires complete environmental control and separation from local conditions." Tom nodded politely, but he was thinking about human colonies on worlds throughout the solar system. Mars settlements that used local resources and adapted to dust storms. Underground facilities that thrived in the crushing pressures of Venus's atmosphere. Orbital habitats that turned the vacuum of space into an advantage rather than an obstacle. As the cultural exchange concluded, the Alliance representatives seemed less confident than they had been at the beginning. The humans had been polite, interested, and appropriately impressed by Alliance technology. But they had also asked questions that suggested a different perspective on survival and adaptation. That evening, Beth overheard Alliance officials discussing the human delegation. In worried tones, they had expected primitive barbarians who would be awed by superior technology and grateful for any assistance. Instead, they were dealing with beings who seemed to evaluate everything from the perspective of practical experience. The real concern, Beth realized, wasn't that humans were unimpressed by Alliance achievements. It was that humans seemed to take those achievements for granted, as if the incredible feats of survival and adaptation that defined Alliance superiority were simply normal parts of existence. As she prepared for sleep in her assigned quarters, Beth reviewed her observations from the past few days. The Alliance was powerful, technologically advanced, and completely convinced of their superiority over all other species. They had built their entire civilization around the idea that they were the ultimate survivors in a hostile galaxy. Tomorrow, they would begin learning how wrong they were. The Alliance Council chamber fell silent as Dr. James Park concluded his presentation on comparative planetary environments. What had begun as a routine briefing on human homeworld conditions had become something far more disturbing. The assembled representatives from across Alliance space sat in stunned quiet, trying to process information that challenged everything they believed about their place in the galaxy. "Let me make sure I understand correctly, Supreme Commander," Vextar said slowly, his scaled hands gripping the podium with enough force to leave scratches in the metal. "You're claiming that Alliance homeworlds would be considered recreational destinations by human standards?" James checked his data tablet one more time, though he knew the numbers by heart. "That's an accurate assessment, Commander. For example, Grimhold's atmospheric composition shows sulfur dioxide concentrations of approximately 200 parts per million, with sulfuric acid rainfall averaging pH 2.1. On Earth, we have industrial regions with worse air quality and natural springs that are significantly more acidic." "Impossible," Dr. Korth interjected, his silicon body flaring with agitation. "Grimhold's environment is lethal to unprotected organic life within minutes." "I'm sure it would be uncomfortable," James agreed diplomatically. "But humans regularly work in similar conditions. Our mining operations, volcanic research stations, and chemical processing facilities all deal with comparable environmental hazards. We just use appropriate safety equipment and rotate personnel to prevent long-term exposure." The Nexari scientist's glow dimmed noticeably. The conditions that had forged his people into the Alliance's premier environmental engineers were routine, occupational hazards to humans. Beth Williams activated the main display screen, showing a live feed from Earth. The transmission had been arranged in advance, but the Alliance representatives weren't prepared for what they saw. The feed opened on Anna Torres, a human colonist working on one of Earth's frontier settlements. She was walking through what appeared to be a hellscape of active volcanic activity, with lava flows visible in the background and ash falling like snow around her. "Good morning from Mount Kilauea," Anna said cheerfully, her voice clear despite the hazardous environment. "I'm conducting a routine survey of mineral deposits in the active flow zone. As you can see, we're having a fairly typical eruption cycle, with temperatures in the immediate area reaching about 1,200 degrees Celsius. The Alliance representatives stared in horror as Anna continued her commentary, casually collecting samples from areas that glowed with molten rock. Her protective gear appeared minimal compared to the massive environmental suits their own people required for similar work. "The atmospheric conditions are a bit challenging today," Anna continued, checking a handheld device. "Sulfur dioxide levels are elevated, and we've got some hydrochloric acid in the ashfall, but nothing that requires special precautions beyond standard respiratory protection." Dr. Korth made a strangled sound that might have been technological distress. The conditions Anna was describing as a bit challenging would require his people's most advanced survival systems. The feed switched to Dr. Rick Santos, a marine biologist working in Earth's deepest ocean trenches. He was operating at pressures that would crush Alliance vessels, in waters so corrosive they would dissolve most known materials. "We're currently at about 11,000 meters below sea level," Rick reported calmly. "Pressure is roughly 100 times Earth's surface atmosphere, and the water temperature is just above freezing. The local chemistry includes some interesting sulfur compounds that would be toxic on the surface, but down here they support an entire ecosystem. The camera showed creatures moving in the darkness around Rick, beings that looked like nightmares given form, with bioluminescent patches and predatory adaptations that made Alliance warriors look tame by comparison. These tube worms grow to about 3 meters in length, Rick continued, approaching one of the creatures with casual confidence. They thrive in conditions that would sterilize most environments, processing chemicals that would be lethal to surface life. It's a perfect example of how life adapts to extreme conditions. Supreme Commander Vextar stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is clearly fabricated propaganda designed to impress us with human capabilities. Actually, these are just routine work assignments, Beth replied mildly. Anna is a graduate student working on her geology thesis. Rick is conducting standard biological surveys. These aren't elite military personnel or specially enhanced individuals. They're ordinary humans doing ordinary jobs. The silence that followed was profound. Alliance species prided themselves on being the galaxy's ultimate survivors, the beings tough enough to thrive where others would perish. The revelation that humans considered such environments routine work assignments was shaking the foundations of their entire worldview. Tom Mitchell activated another display showing technical specifications for human equipment. I should mention that the protective gear they're using is mostly commercial-grade equipment, nothing military or experimental. Standard industrial safety equipment that any human worker would use in similar conditions. The Alliance technical staff began frantically comparing the human equipment specifications to their own advanced survival systems. The results were disturbing. Human standard industrial gear was accomplishing what required their most sophisticated technology. How is this possible? Thais asked, her crystalline structure refracting light in agitated patterns. Your species should not be able to survive such conditions without massive technological support. We evolved on Earth, Beth explained simply. Our planet has a unique combination of environmental challenges that required adaptation across multiple fronts. We didn't just adapt to one type of extreme condition. We adapted to all of them simultaneously. She activated a series of displays showing Earth's environmental diversity. Deserts where surface temperatures exceeded 70 degrees Celsius, frozen regions where the air itself would freeze solid, underwater environments with pressures that could implode spacecraft, atmospheric compositions that changed dramatically with altitude and weather patterns. The key difference, Beth continued, is that Earth doesn't have just one type of environmental extreme. It has dozens, sometimes occurring simultaneously in the same region. A human might experience freezing temperatures, toxic gases, crushing, pressures, and corrosive chemicals all in a single day, depending on their location and weather conditions. Dr. Korth was running calculations on his personal computing device, his glow fluctuating wildly as he processed the implications. According to these parameters, your homeworld should be classified as uninhabitable. The combination of environmental hazards exceeds our safety thresholds by several orders of magnitude. It's certainly challenging, James agreed. But that's why we develop such robust adaptation strategies. When your environment is trying to kill you in multiple ways simultaneously, you either adapt comprehensively or you don't survive. The Alliance representatives were beginning to understand the horrifying truth. They had spent millennia adapting to single environmental challenges, acid rain, volcanic activity, or frozen methane storms. Humans had adapted to all of those challenges and dozens of others occurring simultaneously on the same planet. Supreme Commander Vextar attempted to regain control of the situation. Even if your homeworld is more challenging than initially assessed, this doesn't change the fundamental power structure. The Alliance possesses advanced technology, established trade networks, and military capabilities that far exceed human achievements. Of course, Alex Rivera agreed diplomatically. We're not suggesting any challenge to Alliance authority. We're simply providing accurate information about human capabilities and limitations. But the damage was already done. Alliance citizens throughout the station had access to the same information feeds as their leaders. Social networks were buzzing with discussions about the implications of human capabilities. The psychological foundation of Alliance superiority was crumbling in real time. Dr. Veltar, the chief medical officer, raised another concern. If humans have adapted to such extreme conditions, what are the implications for Alliance medical and biological security? Are your people immune to environmental hazards that affect other species? Not immune, Beth clarified. But we have much higher tolerance levels for environmental stress. Our biology is designed to handle rapid changes in temperature, pressure, atmospheric composition, and chemical exposure. We also have very robust immune systems, since Earth's biological environment is as challenging as its physical environment. The medical implications were staggering. Humans might be carriers of biological agents that were harmless to them, but lethal to Alliance species. Their presence on Alliance worlds could represent an existential threat to native populations. As the briefing concluded, Alliance representatives filed out in stunned silence. They had invited humans to join their coalition of Deathworld survivors, expecting to gain useful shock troops for their military campaigns. Instead, they had discovered that their entire civilization was built on surviving conditions that humans would consider a pleasant vacation. That evening, emergency sessions convened throughout Nexus Station. Alliance leadership struggled to process the implications of their discovery. They weren't the galaxy's ultimate survivors. They were participants in a children's game, proud of achievements that paled before the casual daily existence of a species they had planned to use as expendable soldiers. Supreme Commander Vexitar stood in his private quarters, staring out at the gas giant Typhon through reinforced viewports designed to protect against the system's extreme radiation levels. Those same radiation levels, he now knew, were less intense than Earth's natural background radiation. For the first time in his career, Vexitar faced a problem that couldn't be solved through superior technology or military force. The Alliance had encountered a species that didn't just challenge their assumptions about survival and adaptation. Humans had rendered those assumptions obsolete simply by existing. The Deathworld Alliance had invited humanity to join their coalition. They were beginning to realize that they might have invited their own extinction instead. News of the human revelation spread through Alliance space like wildfire, carrying with it a wave of social upheaval that threatened to tear apart the foundations of their civilization. On Grimhold, the Vorthak homeworld that had shaped the Alliance's dominant species, massive protests erupted in the capital city of Nexus Prime. Vorthak citizens who had spent their entire lives proud of their ability to survive in acid rain were now confronting footage of human children playing in Earth's oceans. The waters those children swam in were more corrosive than Grimhold's atmosphere, yet they splashed and laughed without any protective equipment at all. "We have been living a lie," declared Kexavon, a prominent Vorthak philosopher whose writings had influenced Alliance ideology for centuries. "Our great achievement, our source of pride and identity, is nothing more than a comfortable existence compared to what humans consider normal childhood recreation." The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthak society had been built around the concept of survival through adversity. Their literature, their art, their entire cultural identity celebrated their triumph over hostile conditions. Learning that those conditions barely registered as inconvenient to another species was destroying their sense of self-worth. Similar upheavals were occurring across Alliance space. On the Nexari volcanic worlds, silicon-based citizens were struggling to comprehend how organic beings could casually work in temperatures that required their most advanced cooling systems. The Corvith crystalline structures were resonating with stress frequencies as they grappled with the knowledge that their frozen homeworlds were warmer than Earth's polar regions. Dr. Beth Williams watched the chaos unfold from Nexus stations. Observation deck. Social feeds from across Alliance space showed riots, protests, and emergency governmental sessions. What had begun as a simple cultural exchange was triggering the collapse of an interstellar civilization. "I didn't expect this level of social disruption," she admitted to Tom Mitchell, who was monitoring Alliance communication networks with growing concern. "They built their entire identity around being the toughest species in the galaxy," Tom replied. "Finding out they're not even close to that level of toughness is breaking their psychological foundation. It's like discovering that your greatest achievement is something other people do accidentally." The economic implications were becoming clear as well. Alliance markets were crashing as corporations built around Deathworld survival technology became obsolete overnight. Why invest in expensive environmental suits rated for Alliance extreme conditions when humans accomplished the same tasks with equipment that cost a fraction of the price? Human innovations that had been dismissed as primitive were suddenly in desperate demand. Companies across Alliance space were scrambling to acquire licenses for Earth technology that they now realized was generations ahead of their own capabilities. The military situation was even worse. Alliance armed forces discovered that their elite environmental troops, trained for the harshest conditions their worlds could provide, were laughably unprepared by human standards. Entire military doctrines based on environmental superiority had become meaningless. Colonel Lisa Santos found herself in the uncomfortable position of being asked to evaluate Alliance military capabilities. The results were not encouraging for the Alliance leadership. "Your forces are well-trained and disciplined," she reported diplomatically to the assembled military commanders. "However, their equipment and conditioning are designed for environmental challenges that human forces would consider routine field exercises." Admiral Kexvon, the Alliance's supreme military commander, struggled to maintain his composure. "Surely, you don't mean to suggest that human military capabilities exceed our own?" "I'm not making any comparisons," Lisa replied carefully. "I'm simply observing that Alliance forces seem to require extensive technological support for operations that human forces conduct with minimal equipment." The demonstration that followed was devastating to Alliance morale. Lisa had requested permission to show Alliance commanders how human forces operated in challenging conditions. The Alliance provided what they considered their ultimate training facility, an environmental chamber that cycled through conditions from all their member worlds. A squad of Alliance elite troops entered the chamber wearing their most advanced combat suits. They moved carefully, conserving energy and relying heavily on their equipment's life support systems. Their performance was impressive by any reasonable standard. Then Lisa entered wearing basic human military gear, equipment that looked primitive compared to Alliance technology. She moved through the same environmental challenges with casual efficiency, treating extreme heat, corrosive atmosphere, and crushing gravity as minor inconveniences rather than life-threatening hazards. Standard human military doctrine emphasizes adaptability over technological dependence, she explained as she completed the course in half the time required by Alliance forces. "Our equipment is designed to enhance natural capabilities rather than replace them entirely." The Alliance commanders watched in stunned silence as Lisa demonstrated techniques for surviving equipment failure in hostile environments. She showed them how human soldiers could continue operating effectively even after losing most of their technological support, something that would be a death sentence for Alliance forces. "What happens if your suits fail?" Admiral Kexvon asked. "Then we adapt," Lisa replied simply. "Human soldiers are trained to operate in hostile conditions with or without technological support. Equipment failure is inconvenient, not necessarily fatal." The implications were staggering. Alliance military doctrine assumed that losing environmental protection meant mission failure and probable death. Human military doctrine treated equipment failure as a tactical challenge to be overcome through training and adaptation. As news of the military demonstrations spread, panic began setting in among Alliance leadership. They had spent millennia building a civilization based on technological superiority and environmental adaptation. Both foundations were crumbling as they learned more about human capabilities. Dr. James Park was conducting linguistic analysis of Alliance communications when he noticed a disturbing trend. Military chatter included increasing references to preemptive action and neutralizing threats before they fully develop. The Alliance was beginning to view humanity not as potential allies but as an existential threat. "They're scared," he reported to the human delegation. "The social upheaval is bad enough, but now they're starting to talk about humans as a threat to their survival." Alex Rivera had been expecting something like this. The diplomatic protocols developed for first contact scenarios had included contingencies for situations where alien contact triggered social instability. What they hadn't anticipated was instability on this scale. "We need to start damage control measures," he decided. "The last thing we want is to trigger a war because we accidentally destroyed their self-confidence." The damage control efforts proved insufficient. Alliance communication networks were flooded with debates about the human threat and speculation about Earth's true intentions. Conspiracy theories spread claiming that humans had been secretly infiltrating Alliance space for years, preparing for invasion. The final blow to Alliance stability came when human terraforming engineer Dr. Mike Davis was asked to evaluate Alliance colonization techniques. His assessment was professionally objective and absolutely devastating. "Alliance colonial infrastructure is impressive from an engineering perspective," he reported to the assembled Colonial Development Board. "However, the approach seems unnecessarily complex. These environmental control systems are designed to exclude hostile conditions rather than work with them." "Working with hostile conditions is impossible," protested Director Thess. "Deathworld environments are inherently opposed to life. Survival requires complete isolation from local conditions." "That's one approach," Mike agreed diplomatically. "Human colonial techniques tend toward environmental integration rather than exclusion. We modify our settlements to work with local conditions instead of against them." He showed them footage of human colonies throughout the solar system. Settlements that turned environmental challenges into advantages. Mars colonies that used dust storms to generate power. Venus atmospheric stations that converted sulfuric acid into useful industrial chemicals. Asteroid mining operations that operated in hard vacuum without sealed habitats. "The key insight," Mike explained, "is that hostile conditions often represent untapped resources rather than problems to be avoided. Environmental integration allows colonies to become self-sustaining much more quickly than exclusion-based approaches." The Alliance colonial experts stared at the human colonies in bewilderment. Everything they knew about Deathworld survival told them these settlements should be impossible. Yet there they were, not just surviving, but thriving by embracing the conditions that Alliance technology worked so hard to exclude. Director Theiss ran calculations on her crystalline computing matrix, her structure flickering with processing activity. "According to our models, these colonial approaches should result in immediate settlement failure. The environmental integration you're describing would expose colonists to lethal conditions." "Only if you consider those conditions lethal," Mike replied. "Humans have different tolerance levels for environmental stress. What might be lethal to Alliance species could be merely uncomfortable for us." That evening, Alliance leadership held emergency sessions to discuss their options. The social upheaval was spreading, their military doctrine was obsolete, their colonial techniques were primitive by human standards, and their entire civilization's foundation was crumbling. Supreme Commander Vex Tar stood before the full Alliance Council, his scaled features showing the strain of recent revelations. "We face an unprecedented situation. Our invitation to humanity has triggered consequences we never anticipated. The question now is how we respond." Some council members advocated for immediate military action against Earth, striking before humanity could fully assess Alliance weaknesses. Others argued for diplomatic solutions, hoping to salvage some form of partnership from the disaster. A few voices suggested the unthinkable, that the Alliance should abandon their claims to Deathworld superiority and seek to learn from human adaptation techniques. The debate raged through the night, but no consensus emerged. The Alliance had spent 3 millennia building a civilization based on being the galaxy's ultimate survivors. Learning that they weren't even close to that level was creating a crisis of identity that threatened their very existence. Meanwhile, on the outer rim of Alliance space, entire star systems were beginning to declare independence. The Corveth crystal colonies were the first to break away, announcing that they would seek direct alliance with humanity rather than remain part of an organization that had been built on false premises. "We have discovered that our greatest achievements pale before human childhood recreation," declared Crystal Singer Velnath in a broadcast that reached every Alliance world. "We choose to ally ourselves with true Deathworld masters rather than pretend superiority we do not possess." The secession movement spread rapidly. Nexari volcanic colonies followed suit, then Vorthak frontier settlements. Each defection was accompanied by requests for direct diplomatic contact with Earth, as if humanity represented salvation from the psychological devastation of their shattered worldview. Dr. Beth Williams found herself in the impossible position of trying to calm a panic she had accidentally created. "We never intended to challenge Alliance authority or trigger social upheaval," she assured Supreme Commander Vex Sitar during emergency diplomatic sessions. "Your intentions are irrelevant," Vex Sitar replied, his voice carrying undertones of desperation. "Your very existence challenges everything the Alliance represents. How do we maintain unity among species who now believe their greatest achievements are meaningless?" The question had no easy answer. The Alliance faced a fundamental problem that couldn't be solved through technology or military force. Their entire civilization was experiencing an existential crisis, and the source of that crisis was simply human existence. As reports continued to arrive from across Alliance space, the scope of the social collapse became clear. This wasn't just political upheaval or economic disruption. It was the complete breakdown of a galactic civilization's core beliefs about itself and its place in the universe. The cascade effect was accelerating, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The Alliance's invitation to humanity was proving to be exactly what the title promised: their destruction call. 6 months after the human delegation's arrival at Nexus Station, the Deathworld Alliance ceased to exist as a functioning government. The final collapse came not with dramatic battles or political declarations, but with a simple administrative memo announcing that insufficient member worlds remained to maintain quorum for Alliance Council sessions. Supreme Commander Vex Sitar sat alone in what had once been the Alliance's Supreme Command Center. Most of his staff had departed weeks ago, returning to Grimhold or seeking employment with the emerging human-aligned coalitions that were forming throughout former Alliance space. The massive displays that had once showed Alliance fleet movements across dozens of star systems now displayed mostly empty space and automated distress beacons. "Status report," he requested from the few remaining technicians. 17 more systems declared independence yesterday," reported his aide, a young Vorthak named Kess who had stayed out of personal loyalty rather than professional obligation. "The Nexari core worlds have formally requested human colonization assistance. The Corveth Crystal Singers are offering their entire industrial base in exchange for Earth citizenship programs." Vex Sitar absorbed the information without visible reaction. He had long since passed the point where additional bad news could affect him. The civilization he had spent his life defending had been destroyed not by enemy action, but by the simple revelation that everything they believed about themselves was wrong. The irony was that humanity had never intended to destroy the Alliance. Dr. Beth Williams and her team had done everything possible to minimize the diplomatic damage once they realized what was happening. They had offered technology sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs, and even formal Alliance membership under more equitable terms. None of it mattered. The Alliance species couldn't accept charity from beings they had planned to use as expendable soldiers. Every human offer of assistance was interpreted as condescending pity from superior beings who were too polite to mention their obvious dominance. The psychological trauma went deeper than simple wounded pride. Alliance species had built their entire identity around survival against impossible odds. Learning that those odds weren't even remotely impossible by galactic standards had shattered their sense of purpose and achievement. "Sir?" Kess interrupted. "Carefully. We're receiving a transmission from the human embassy ship. Ambassador Rivera is requesting permission to dock." Vextar considered refusing, but there was no point in maintaining hostility toward beings who had already proven they could destroy the Alliance without firing a shot. "Grant permission. Route him to my personal quarters." Alex Rivera arrived, accompanied by only a small diplomatic escort. The human ambassador looked genuinely saddened by the devastation surrounding him. Empty corridors that had once bustled with activity from dozens of species now echoed with their footsteps. "Commander Vextar," Alex said formally, offering a diplomatic salute that acknowledged the Vorthak's rank despite his government's collapse. "I wanted to speak with you personally before Nexus Station is officially decommissioned. Have you come to gloat?" Vextar asked without particular animosity. "To witness the final moments of a civilization that dared to challenge human superiority?" "We never considered the Alliance a challenge," Alex replied honestly. "That was the problem. You invited us to join a coalition of Deathworld survivors, but you were thinking in terms that didn't apply to humanity. We weren't trying to prove superiority. We were just being ourselves." The simplicity of the statement was perhaps the most devastating thing about it. Humanity hadn't set out to destroy the Alliance. They had simply existed in ways that made Alliance achievements look trivial by comparison. "What happens now?" Vexatar asked. "Do humans claim Alliance territory, establish an empire to replace our confederation?" "Nothing like that," Alex assured him. "Earth governments have no interest in territorial expansion. We have more than enough challenges managing our own solar system. Most human political leaders consider interstellar governance completely impractical." That was another blow to Alliance understanding. They had assumed that any species capable of such casual dominance would naturally seek to expand their influence. The idea that humans might achieve galactic supremacy accidentally, then ignore it as administratively inconvenient, was almost incomprehensible. "Then what becomes of former Alliance worlds?" Vextar pressed. "They're forming their own governments," Alex explained. "Many are requesting human advisors or technical assistance, but they're maintaining political independence. Some are establishing trade relationships with Earth. Others are pursuing isolationist policies. A few are forming new alliances with each other based on genuine mutual interest rather than shared delusions of superiority." Through the command center's viewports, they could see ships departing Nexus Station in steady streams. Former Alliance species were abandoning the symbol of their failed civilization, returning to homeworlds they now viewed with very different perspectives. Some were embracing the truth about their capabilities and working to adapt their societies accordingly. The Nexari had begun developing new colonial techniques based on human environmental integration principles. The Corveth were redesigning their crystal-growing processes to work with hostile conditions rather than despite them. Others were retreating into isolation, too proud to accept help, but too devastated to continue their previous expansionist policies. The Vorthak homeworld had closed its borders entirely, declaring that they needed time to rediscover their true identity without external influences. "What about you personally?" Alex asked Vextar. "Earth would be happy to offer you asylum or assistance in whatever path you choose to pursue." Vextar considered the offer seriously. It was generous, especially considering that he had spent recent months planning military action against Earth. But accepting human charity would be admitting a level of defeat that he wasn't prepared to face. "I will return to Grimhold," he decided. My people will need leaders who understand what we've learned, even if we're not ready to act on that knowledge yet. The offer remains open, Alex assured him. Humanity isn't going anywhere, and we're always interested in genuine cooperation when you're ready for it. As Alex prepared to leave, Vextar found himself asking one final question. Why didn't you conquer us? When you realized how weak we were compared to your capabilities, why didn't you simply take control? Alex paused at the doorway, considering his answer carefully. Because conquest requires seeing other beings as enemies or resources to be exploited. Humans don't generally think that way. We saw the Alliance as potential friends and trading partners. Learning that you weren't as powerful as you thought didn't change our interest in friendship. Even after we planned to use you as expendable soldiers? You were working with incomplete information about our capabilities, Alex replied diplomatically. We understand that first contact situations often involve misunderstandings. The important thing is that we can move forward from here. After the human delegation departed, Vextar stood alone in the command center for several hours, watching the last Alliance ships leave Nexus Station. The massive structure would be abandoned soon, left as a monument to the dangers of basing, civilization on false assumptions about galactic hierarchy. The final irony was that humanity's accidental destruction of the Alliance might actually benefit former member species in the long run. They were being forced to confront their actual capabilities and limitations, which could lead to more realistic and sustainable approaches to survival and expansion. But that was a lesson for future generations. Vexatar's generation would be remembered as the one that invited their own obsolescence by extending friendship to beings who redefined the meaning of survival itself. As he prepared to board the transport back to Grimhold, Vextar reflected on the Alliance's final lesson. They had learned that there were indeed ultimate Deathworld survivors in the galaxy. Unfortunately, those survivors weren't them, and the invitation to meet humanity had proven to be exactly what observers would later call it, the Deathworld Alliance's destruction call. The humans, meanwhile, returned to Earth with fascinating data about alien civilizations, new trading opportunities, and a slightly bewildered understanding that they were apparently much more impressive than they had realized. Most Earth governments filed the first contact reports under successful diplomatic mission and began planning expanded exploration programs to meet other potential galactic neighbors. After all, if the rest of the galaxy was going to treat humanity as some kind of ultimate survivor species, they might as well live up to the reputation. There were probably other interesting civilizations out there who might appreciate human friendship and technical assistance. The universe, it seemed, was full of possibilities for a species too adaptable to realize how remarkable they really were.